Okay guys, so we need to get the software Autodesk Maya. It's a free download for a student like yourself, and I'll show you just how to get it. So you're going to want to open up a browser like Google Chrome or whatever you have. I recommend Chrome. And what we're going to do is we're going to Google this, we're going to Google Maya Student 2017, okay? And what we put in here will get us right to where we need to go. If you don't get this result, try using Google search and typing in exactly what I typed, okay? Okay, so you're gonna have to create an Autodesk Maya account, okay, to download this software. But you want to have that account attached to an email, okay? An email of some sort that you own that says you're at least 18 years of age. And this just avoids any complications. We're students. We're gonna choose our birthdays. I'll go ahead and choose mine. Doesn't really matter as long as you're 18, right? This is where you're going to put in your email. You're going to create a password here. You're going to agree, and you're going to create an account. Okay. Once you have an account, it may ask you to verify through your email inbox. You're going to be able to sign in right here. Okay. And once you can sign in, there we are. Okay. And then we get to choose our version here. Okay. So we're going to choose Maya 2017. For lesser machines, we're going to choose 2014 or anything in between. I recommend 2017. Windows 64-bit for general Windows machines. Mac users can still download this, and then you got Linux users. I recommend, of course, I'm teaching this for Windows. And then English, okay? And then once you've got that, some information here might be needed on the install, but you're going to click Install Now right here, okay? Boom. And then we're going to run through this, what's called an install wizard, and it's going to be very straightforward. You're going to accept and press next until this software is installed, okay? It's not going to let me install this software again on this machine. But it's very straightforward from this point to just go through what's called this install wizard, and you accept, you install, yes, finish, and then you'll be able to open the software once it's finished. Alright, so when you're creating your models or trying to create a character or something like that, you may just come to the conclusion that the best and fastest way to do things is to just create a bunch of primitive shapes, shove them into each other. Right, and call it a day and say that's your little gun. Let's create another one of these. Your laser Gatling gun, and you're done. And that's all fine and dandy for certain purposes, right? But if you were to want to smooth this or make it look a little bit nicer, you would notice that everything looks a little different than you thought it did, especially that they don't connect or do anything interesting here, right? Well, this is what I'm interested in. Right at this point where these objects collide, there's no way for light to interact with that. And the way we perceive things, especially in Maya, is with the way objects want to interact with light. So instead, let's talk about it in this sense, where you start with a cube, okay? And you take a face, and you do a couple interesting things to it. Maybe put some edge loops in this world. Take some vertexes, scale them out, select some faces, pull them out. Now, here we go. Now let's place this next to our older version of this. Let's take that cylinder and divide them down quite a bit. Scale them down. There we are. Scale them this way. Cool. Alright. These are essentially the same object from this view. But if I subdivide this one, you already come to see how these objects can be a little different. And if I take a little bit more time and use some more tools in my toolkit, you'll begin to see that light can interact with this junction. If I use the same tools in my toolkit for this object, light cannot interact with that junction as well. Okay, So that's one of the differences between modeling your object from one cube and trying to collide other objects together. Alright, so I want to show you how it is to basically move around a shape or an object in Maya and how to create that object. How does it that it comes into the world? Because as you can see, your scene is blank to start with. So you want to go to Create, Polygon Primitive, and down here at the bottom, there's an option called Interactive Creation. Okay, by default it's on. I'd like you to turn it off for now. Okay, so by default it's on, and it looks something like this. Okay, oops, sorry. Control Z that. By default, it's on, and what it does is when you do this, it asks you to drag the base on the grid, then pull up for the height, okay? So you drag the base, and then you pull up for the height. That's not how I want you to create shapes to start with, okay? If you decide that's how you want to do things later on, that's fine. But I would like you to turn that off to start with, and then you can, so since your menu's set up right, these are all polygon primitives right here, from the sphere all the way to the pipe. So we have a sphere, a cube, a cylinder, a cone, a plane, polyplane, a torus, and a pyramid, and a pipe. Okay, so these are all our polygon primitives. These are the base shapes we're going to model everything from, okay? And believe it or not, we're going to generally come from these two shapes right here. Also a plane, so cube, cylinder, plane, all right? We'll get into more of that later, but so let's just drop a cube into the world. So now that we've turned this interactive creation off, now when we click a cube, it creates a 1x1 basic cube, okay, right into the center of the world, which is nice. Now notice how I'm using my mouse wheel to scroll in and out. I'm going to hold Alt, left click, hold those down, and I can drag left, I can drag right, I can drag up, I can drag down, and that allows me to rotate around my object. Now I'm going to hold, I'm going to hold Alt, middle mouse button, Alt, middle click, they call it, and that'll allow me to pan around the scene, okay? So rotate, pan, zoom. Now if you mix those together, you get something like this. Alright? So let's look at every single point on this cube, huh? Every point. There's a point. There's a point, point. Let's just practice going around this cube. So we just zooming in, we're zooming around, okay? And we can create all sorts of objects just like this by clicking them into the center of the world. Zooming around them, okay? Alright. So when we create objects in Maya, we're going to talk about their resolution, and what that means is the resolution refers to how many points it takes to make up that shape, how many edges, what are the edge loops like, okay, so we're going to go over that right now. So components, we got vertexes, okay, and so on this shape we have 8 vertexes. I'm going to hold shift, select them all, okay, we have 8 vertexes and I can expand them out, expand them in. And we have more edges. We have actually 12 edges. Okay, all 12 edges there. Then we have 6 faces. So the resolution of this object can be modified, okay? So we can mess with it a little bit. So before we created it, we can go create. So we created it just like this, but we could have went to this option up here, create polygon primitives, cube, all right, and now we're going to call this option box, all right? So this is just creating the object if I just click it, but if I go to the little box next to it, it's called an option box. Click it, boom, here we go. We get this new little menu, and it says polygon cube option box, and we can change the width, the height, the depth, the divisions along that. That refers to how many edges will be placed along there. I'll show you that. This will be the axis is created on, and all these I don't want you to worry about, okay? So let's just worry about these right here. Let's go ahead and change some of these. Let's make it 2 wide. Let's make it 0.5 deep, 1 high, and we're going to give all of these 2 divisions. Okay, there we go. Notice I could have just cranked them up like this. And then create. Now this cube looks a lot different. Let's move that aside than just clicking the cube. We've actually changed the way this cube is now created. So if I went back to create polygon primitives cube option box, edit, reset settings, apply. Now this cube is back to being created normally. Okay, so we can change the way objects are created with the option box very easily. Okay, so let's try that with a cylinder. Okay, so let's delete these objects. Let's create a cylinder right here. boom, this cylinder has a crazy amount of subdivisions. We'll say it has a high resolution. And let's see exactly how many it has. So if we deleted it, we can go create polygon primitive cylinder option box. It has 20 axis subdivisions on the y-axis, okay? 20, and only one, and it has a height of 2 and a radius of 1. So let's change these things. Let's go radius of 0.5 for fun, a height of 6. Axis subdivisions, I'd like us to stick around 8, okay? So I want you, for now, to get in the habit of creating cylinders with an axis subdivision of 8. And we will change these to something like 4. How about that, huh? Okay, let's create. Boom, that's our new cylinder now. Notice how he or she has many less subdivisions around this way, has quite a few more, 3 more along this direction, and he's taller and skinnier, okay? So if we move him out of the way, go back to create polygon primitive cylinder option box, and went edit reset settings and created, we would see that this was the standard default cylinder. This is the new one we created, okay? Alright, so we're going to talk about now how to move between different views, okay? This is going to be called a perspective view right here, alright? Right here, moving around my perspective view. So I'm going to hit spacebar, okay? Hit spacebar once. It's going to expand my views. We're going to call that expanding your views. You have a top down on Y, front on Z, side from the X. What's that saying is that this top view is looking down on this Y-axis, this front view is looking in on this Z-axis, and this side view is looking in on this X-axis, okay? So I can still tumble this view over here. I'm going to call it tumbling when I'm moving around like that. But notice how these cannot be tumbled. Okay, these are what's called orthographic views, straight on. They have no perspective warping from the camera. I'll show you what I mean by that. So let's create, I'm going to hit spacebar again. See how I did that? I hovered over this perspective view, called it the perspective view, not the top, the front, or the side, and I hit spacebar again. So I can do what I call dedicate to that view, okay? Dedicate my whole screen to that particular view by using just spacebar and where my mouse position is. So when I'm in perspective view and I create a cube, it's really hard to actually look straight at it. There we go. Okay. There we go. I'm trying to look straight at this cube. Do you see that? And I can't because the camera's lens is curved and it's receiving light in a like the same way that your eye would. So you can't look straight at things. So notice how the back of the cube points and edges are very much visible from the front, okay? And if I'm in an orthographic view from the side and I hit the same wireframe mode, notice how those aren't visible. And the reason that can be very useful is if you have a very complex model and you're trying to do some cool stuff and select particular components, it's very tough to see that this point and this point are actually in the same like plane of existence, right? Whereas here in this view, it's very easy to see. So changing between these views and modeling in the perspective window or the orthographic windows can be very useful. So being able to change in between these views is very, very useful. And even looking at them at the same time, right? So, okay. So that's the idea with the 4 different views. Let's talk about the tool settings now. So here we are, channel box, attribute editor. Here's the tool settings right here, okay? So the tool settings are kind of cool. I would rather not access them from here. I like to access them by double-clicking this tool window over here, okay? It's a little bit easier way of accessing them. So one of the things we can do is notice how when I go to move this shape, it moves based off of like these predefined axes, right? Y-axis, blue axes, sorry, Z-axis, X-axis, right? But what if I wanted to take this shape right here? I wanted to rotate this, and I wanted to move this face like directly outwards. What I would say is directly towards its normal angle, okay? And that's a mouthful, but what I mean is that you see this face, I don't want to move it upwards. I don't want to move it this way. I want to move it like directly that way, right? And I can't do that very well unless I change the way my tools work. This tool, this move tool. So if I double click this move tool, I can change this axis orientation, okay? And I can change it to be a couple different things. So let's try object. Doesn't change that at all, does it? Because it's based off of the object itself. You have world, which is what it was at, basically. Component. Now this is now, the component I have selected is the face. And now this is based off of just that face. That's all. It doesn't care about the rest of the cube. And that gives me what I want. See? All right, so you can mess with all these. This is the normal I was talking about. Sometimes that could be buggy. This one's weird, doesn't make sense for this instance. I would like to just think about object, world, and component. Okay, those are the three that I care about. Very useful. See? So that's how we're going to want to change the way the tool settings work. Okay, and they're going to see that's how the move tool works. Now the rotate tool and the scale tool, they all have to be changed as well. See how I'm changing between W, E, and R. They all move within their own axis orientation until told otherwise. Now we can still do the same thing and reset the damn tool. So there we go, reset the tool. There we go, and we have no problems. Okay, it's now back into world space, believe it or not. Okay, all right. We're going to go a little bit deeper into the interface. What I call the interface is like what pops up on the screen here on Maya. Like what kind of settings do you have access to, like visually, not just hotkeys or anything like that. Like what's going on with your screen here. So far we've had it very blank like this, right? We changed our views. So let's talk about we're going to talk about the channel box. Okay, we're going to talk about the attribute editor, and we're going to talk about the modeling toolkit and the tool set editor. Okay, the tool editor. All right, we're not going to talk about this rig thing right here. Okay, so these four are the ones we're going to talk about. So let's create a cube. Okay, cube pops into existence just like that. Let's go first to the channel box. Okay, so Maya is the software program. When you create a cube, it's a function to create the cube. Okay, it has parameters. It wants to know things, how it's going to be created. Okay, we've seen the option box for creating a cube and how we could change that. That was actually just changing the parameters for the function create cube. Okay, so when we create this cube, afterwards we can go to its input. What was being inputted into this function? A function takes an input, and a lot of the times it outputs something. In this case, it outputs your cube in the way that you asked for it to be created. So when we have the cube selected, we can go to the channel box and we can control that input. Okay, and these are the same options we had access to in the option box for creating the cube. This time we can modify them afterwards. So the way this channel box works is if you hover over this field here, you can just drag on it. Okay, you can change the width, you can change the height, we can change the depth, we can change the subdivisions, we can change the resolution of this object after the fact. In many versions of Maya, including 2017, you can run into problems if you've done other things to your objects prior to modifying this input. Okay, so there are many functions you can run on a shape, many tools you can use on a shape that haven't been shown yet that would make this not usable. Okay, so this can be done at the beginning, right when the shape's created, without a problem. So this looked like that. A cube was created, and this channel box right here was opened. And these can be dragged, or you can enter in hard values. See? You can just click on it, enter in a value. And that's the channel box. Okay, so you're going to find yourself wanting to match an image of some sort when you're modeling, because just thinking about the object or switching between your browser window or an image window might get a little inefficient. So if I change my views, I prefer a lot of the times to import my image plane into an orthographic view. Okay, so where we choose to do this matters. Okay, so I'll show you why. We're going to go to View, Image Plane, Import Image. Okay, it's going to go right to your project directory that we created inside of what's called Source Images. Okay, so that's where we're going to want to put that image plane. Let's go ahead and go to our browser. Let's go to a new window and let's look at boxes. Cardboard. Okay, some cardboard boxes stacked. Go to images, and we're looking for some stacked cardboard boxes like this. We'll go ahead and click the image, right click, and we're going to save the image as. Okay, and we're going to find that directory. Okay, so this directory was called, it was in your users, it was in documents, and it was called Maya 2017 class. So let's go find that directory with that image. Okay, we're going to save it there. Documents, Maya 2017 class, Brandon Harris 3D, and it was called Source Images. All right, we're going to put that in there. Okay, boom. That's where it went. Okay, so now we go back to Maya, and lo and behold, there it is. Okay, so we can open it. Boom, image plane. The image plane can be selected, it can be scaled, it can be moved. Okay, let's keep it around the center. Let's move it up a little bit. Scale it up. I like to make it a little bigger. Okay, let's move it backwards. See how I can use multiple views here. I want to move it backwards. See, in front of the grid, behind the grid. I want it behind the grid. There we are. And that's how we're going to do things. Now, I can show that image plane here, or I can hide that image plane here by going show image plane. See, on and off. Same thing can be done here. Show image plane. Okay, if you're having trouble selecting the image plane, you can always draw a marquee selection over it like that. All right, and that's how you're going to import image planes. If you import an image plane into this view, it looks very funny. Watch this. So notice how I imported it into the front view. If you import it into this view, it is everywhere, and you cannot scroll on it. It is everywhere. So if I delete this first image plane I had, and I just view import image plane, if I accidentally put it into this perspective window rather than an orthographic window, it's huge and it's just everywhere. Okay, so that's not what we want to do. We want to import it into this view over here. Okay, so let me delete these real quick. View image plane, import image. We wanted to put it into the front view. It was in our source images because that's where our project directory is. That's where we put it. And then we can move it and scale it. Okay, that's image planes. Another tool in Maya is going to be called the bevel tool. So like the extrude and the insert edge loop tool, it's going to be living up here. So we create a cube and we can hit bevel. All right, we have to be in object mode. Sorry, make sure you're in object mode. Bevel. There you go. And this is what it'll do to your object. Okay, and if you open up the channel box, select your object. You may not even have to have the channel box open for that, but it also will be right here. This input poly bevel. Okay, and it'll also be right here for 2017. And you, by changing the fraction, you change the distance away from the original edges that it lays in these like new edge loops. Okay, changing the segments will change the number of edge loops that are laid in. Okay, and then you can mess with these other settings. I don't recommend messing with these, just these two right here. Excuse me. There we are, and we can basically make an object look very round. Okay, we can do bevel again, add a mesh, bevel. We can make it look very angular, and that is an actual, what's called a bevel right there. Whereas this is more rounded using the bevel tool. Okay, and that's very fast, okay, and that's not using the edge loop tool or anything like that, or extrudes. These results could be attained with different tools, but the bevel tool gets us there very fast. We can bevel certain, we don't have to bevel whole objects, we can bevel like certain edges. Okay, so select those edges, and I can run a bevel on those. Lower the fraction. Okay, alright, and we could also use the bevel tool to do things like this. So if we take this face and we use the extrude tool, we use the offset, we extrude again, and we bring it down. Okay, now when we learned about subdividing objects using the subdivision preview, we remember that it kind of does this smooth preview of objects. Okay, and we could see how the bevel tool works with subdivision preview, because the bevel tool is laying down these edge loops, which gives the object this resolution for the subdivision preview to kind of rely on, and it pulls tight on those edges. Here's the original cube itself. Okay, and so the bevel tool, if I run it on this object here, just the whole object, will allow it to smooth and look pretty good in a subdivision preview. So you can see the attraction to using bevel with your modeling techniques. You can permanently attach items together using various methods like mesh combine, and they become one object, but you'll notice if you hit wireframe, they still collide with each other in a very unuseful way. Okay, and so there's an alternative to this. If you wanted to make very fast shapes without doing any other modeling techniques that would take time, you can create two shapes, you can collide them together. This requires that two shapes are colliding together. Okay, and you can select them and go to mesh, Boolean, There are three tools here: union, difference, and intersection. So let's do difference first. So this is going to be a subtraction problem. Boolean difference works like that. So you're going to go this minus that. Mesh. So notice I selected in that order. This, so, oops, they're one object on accident. Separate. Hey, boogers. Mesh, separate. Okay. This, shift, click this. So this minus that. Mesh, Boolean, difference. And it cuts a hole inside of that object that is the exact size of the other intersecting geometry. Okay? And then that object disappears. So let's move that to the side. And let's do this again. Let's scale her up a little bit. And pull on a cube, or a cylinder. And once again, you have to make sure they're colliding. And let's select this minus that. All right, this isn't going to be very interesting, but you'll see, you get the point. It subtracts it in the order in which you select it. Okay? Very cool. Let's put that in there. It fits. Okay, cool. And now let's discover the other ones. So we have, go ahead and use two of the same types of shapes. All right? And we're going to now discover, oh, I'm sorry, one moment. We're now going to discover the other Boolean shapes. So here we are, mesh, Boolean. We're going to do union, which makes one shape out of the two. But unlike the mesh combine, they are no longer intersecting with each other. And interestingly enough, if you go inside the shape, it's now created a cavity that is the exact size of the part of the cylinder that was not intersecting with the cube. So it deleted whatever was intersecting. Okay? We can change the operation from right here to the other ones, but we're not going to do that. We're going to leave this, put it to the side. So that's a difference. That's a union. Now here we are. Okay. Here we are. So the last one is going to be mesh Boolean. It's going to be intersection. So if I move this to the side a little bit like this, just like this, and go like that, I can go mesh Boolean, intersection. Okay, and it gives me the exact part of the geometry that of the shapes that we're intersecting. Okay. All right, so now we're going to get into some pretty interesting tools. First one we're going to get into is called Insert Edge Loop Tool. How to find these tools, and why they're useful. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a cube. And to find these tools, as long as your screen is set up like we decided in the beginning, you'll have access to this mesh, edit mesh, and mesh tools. Okay, so we're going to find tools within there. Okay, they also live, a majority of them that we're going to be using live right here as well. But let's go ahead and learn about where they live and where their option boxes live for right now. So we're going to be talking about Insert Edge Loop, which lives in Mesh Tools. Insert Edge Loop. All right, the instruction for the tool generally pops up right away. It says click, drag on edges. Click, drag on edges. So click, drag on edges. There we are. If you try to click on a face and drag, nothing's going to happen. As long as you click, drag on an edge, it's going to lay an edge loop, a loop of edges that goes all the way around all four-sided faces of an object, perpendicular to the edge you're clicking on. That's a mouthful, but what I mean is that if I click, drag on this edge right here, it lays down an edge loop exactly perpendicular to it, this way. Now, perpendicular refers to it creating a 90-degree angle right there. So I'm just inserting edge loops. Okay? One of the funny things about this tool is until you hit Q and click dead space, you're going to continue to insert edge loops. Okay? You have to exit the tool. You have to complete the tool. Now I've increased the resolution of my object in a very weird way that is much different than how it would have occurred if I would have created the object, went to my channel box, chose my input, and cranked my subdivisions, right? These two objects look much different. I was able to maybe strategically or creatively place my edge loops so that I could do things like make new face selections, right? These are now new little face selections I can mess with, a lot of new edges, a lot of new vertexes. And this is the fundamental of modeling here, is creating this resolution for you to be able to go in and sculpt your object, move vertexes, move edges until you get what you want. Okay? That's the Insert Edge Loop tool. All right, another interesting tool called the Extrude tool. we'll talk about now. We'll go ahead and create a cube as normal. Let's open up the channel box, go to its input, and crank up its subdivisions a little bit. There we go. Something like that. Alright, go ahead and close that down. And we're going to go to, this one will be under Edit Mesh, Extrude. Alright, it also lives right here. Edit Mesh, Extrude, or Control E. Okay, so we're going to first select a component, such as a face. Alright, I'd like to extrude faces for now. Select a face, go to Edit Mesh, Extrude. Now this pops up a new gizmo, a new little gizmo. Looks like our move gizmo. Can be used the exact same way, right? It's attached to a scale gizmo. See? So this little gizmo's new. And it has this option box over here for thickness. Okay. Location, translation on the Z. See? Same as the move. Offset, which just scales it inwards or outwards evenly, offsetting it. Divisions, how many divisions are created as it's extruded. And keep faces together, go ahead and leave that on. Okay, and that's the extrude. So I can click extrude there, or under Edit Mesh Extrude, or Control E. Once the face is extruded, it can be moved. Okay, so what I want you to notice there is that you can select a face, you can extrude, click off of it, go and not even remember that you extruded that face, and there's an extra face there. Okay, and that can present some problems later on. So whenever you run a function like extrude or insert edge loop, you'll see down here it says result poly extrude face 4. Okay, and if you want, you said, oh, I didn't mean to do that, we'll Control Z, like in most software, we'll undo it, and you'll see undo poly extrude. There's no longer an extra face there. Okay, so if you accidentally extrude something and don't remember it, and you go undo, you'll see undo poly extrude. That's when you know that you've undone that extrude, and you don't have any problems or double faces on top of each other. Okay, so let's go how to run the extrude and how to undo it, and check down here until it's been undone. 2, 1. All right. So when you've learned how to like modify shapes like cylinders, one of the things you'll notice is that a cylinder obviously is trying to emulate like a circle, and it wants to be really even. So when you go to increase its size, you can make it like oval really easily and not circular. So when you pull it by its center, it increases in all directions. And sometimes you just want it to get like wider, okay? And what you can do, a bigger radius. And so what you could do other than using the channel box is holding control, the control modifier. And if you pull on the green axis here, it's going to get wider. So it's not going to change in thickness this way, okay? It's not going to change in height. It's going to change in radius, okay, by holding control. And if you use the control on that, it'll only scale perpendicular to the axes in which you're clicking if you're holding control. So the control modifier, when you're using the scale tool, makes the object act perpendicular to the axis you choose at a 90 degrees. So if I hold control and pull on this one, he's going to scale in all areas that are perpendicular to that axis. See? Okay, so that's what the control modifier can do. And so how this can be useful is if I have a cylinder like this, I delete those faces, and I double click this edge loop up here, and I hit extrude, and I pull it upwards, I can hit R, and instead of trying to do it like that, right, which it can look even, I can hold control and pull on it like that, and it's even in all directions. Now if you're modeling only in a side view, this won't even matter. Like, you won't notice this at all. You won't notice the difference, and that can be a big pain. So when you're modeling like in a side view, you can be doing a lot of this, which might not be your intended purpose, but if you're holding control, it will go in all directions. Okay, so the control modifier will make the scalar tool act in a uniform way. Alright, so in Maya, you can create some pretty interesting models by just, well, depends on what your idea of interesting is, but you can create some interesting models by just moving some shapes around, okay, and putting them together, okay, and notice how they're still all separate shapes, so I have to select them all, and then they move by some weird point up here, and they move separately, okay, and what if I wanted them to move together, like this was supposed to be an arm of some sort? what I can do is I can do mesh combine, all right, and that puts the gizmo into the center of the group of objects, and they're now one object. And I can reverse that by going mesh separate, okay? So that puts objects permanently together. It doesn't combine them permanently, as in when you go inside them, they're still like they still are colliding with each other, but they can be selected as one object, okay? And then you can reverse that by doing mesh separate. All right. All right. So we've been dealing a lot with polygons and modeling in Maya so far. In fact, that's all we've been dealing with. So I'm going to show you something a little different real quick that'll be useful, and it's called a curve. Okay. So we're going to change. We can change this to curve, and we can access these tools here. It's kind of hard to tell what curve you're actually using, right? So if we change this to curves, we can get this, or we can go to create curve tools, and they'll be right here, okay, where the actual names of them. So let's go ahead and use the EP curve tool, or the editable point curve tool, or the control vertex curve tool. Either one's fine. You'll notice there are some slight nuances between them. The curve tool will create arcs based off of like 3 points, and the EP curve tool will just create arcs between 2 points. Okay, and then you have these tools here to mess around with as well. I'm going to stick to these two. Let's do EP curve tool. Alright, so if I'm in my perspective view, I can just draw a curve. See that? It's like a line. And it goes in space, okay? And it's kind of like trying to stick to a plane, trying to figure out what it is I actually want to do, okay? I don't recommend drawing curves in this way. If I hit Q, I can select it, I can delete it. I recommend drawing curves in these orthographic views, okay? So you can be a little more, what I like to say, explicit, or I want it exactly right here on this plane, okay? So EP curve tool. And I'm going to go ahead and draw a little snake, okay? Don't judge my snake. He's a snake. Alright, and you see he laid flat for sure on that plane right there. Okay, let's hit Q, let's get out of there. There's my snake. I can hit space, I can hold right click, and I get a couple new components with this curve. It's not a polygon. I get a curve point, a control vertex, object mode, hole, edit point. Let's go ahead and ignore curve point, hole, edit point. Let's do control vertex and object mode, okay? Let's just look at those. Here we are. Here are those points I laid. These aren't the points I actually laid. These are little handles based off of the points I laid, which allow me to fix my curve. See? I can modify it. Cool. Now, why do I want this curve? What can I do with this curve? Okay, I can do some really cool things with this curve. Let me show you. All right. So he's kind of, I moved him around a little weirdly right there. That's fine. I don't really care. So now the next thing is I can create these profile circles and squares. Okay, so let's try let's do a circle. He pops right there in the middle of the world. All right, so let's use our tools of navigation, and we want to move him exactly onto the beginning of this curve where I started drawing this curve, right down here. Okay, not at the end, not in the middle, right where I started drawing this curve. And then I can scale him down a little bit if I hold, see how when I just pull on that scale it doesn't do anything, but if I hold control, it'll pull it in evenly. Yeah, there you go. Okay. And I can rotate it. There we are. And I want it to face the direction of the path, okay? There we are. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time getting it centered, facing the direction of the path. There we go. I got two curves. I got a NURB circle, it's called, and an editable point curve. All right, here we go. So I'm going to select them both, okay? I want to go to surfaces, and I want to go to extrude. All right, before I hit extrude, I want to open the option box. All right, and I want to say, I want it to be a tube. I want it to be along the path, okay? I want it to be along the path direction. I want it to be a polygon, all right? I want it to be quads instead of triangles. I want it to be four-sided faces. And I want it to be based off of the control points that I laid down, not just some standard fit, all right? And this should give me, boom. Okay, so you can see a little bit of a bug of it showing up black. It's inside out, and that's no big deal. The tool still worked, okay? That's just inside out. There we are. So it took this profile, took this path, and it created this shape, this polygon, based off of that, okay? And so it was very important that our options look exactly like this. Let me scroll it up a little bit. There we go. Where it is making a tube, it's following the path, okay? It's going along the path direction. These aren't modified at all. This stays at complete, not just partial. It's not just going partly along the curve. It's not any of these weird little output geometries. It's a polygon, like we mess with. and it's using the control points to create these edge loops, okay? And go in and I can modify the shape just like I would any polygon. Okay? Make my little snake. Okay, so you can do interesting thing with shapes once you learn that you can select their various components. You can actually delete them too. So a face, for instance, can be deleted. Oops, I accidentally got one behind it. There we go. A face can be deleted, which makes something like a container, right? And so if you have different types of components, you can select faces, delete them, and create different shapes based off of that. Okay. So if you go to try to select an edge though and delete it, what you'll get is the edge will delete, but what stays is the vertex that created it. And so even if I delete this edge here, the vertex that was there is still there, which is kind of funky in a lot of senses and not really right. You can delete the vertex, which creates this triangle, but if you hold Control when you delete an edge, what it'll do is it'll delete the vertex that was associated, all the vertexes associated with that edge. Okay, so I recommend holding Control when you delete edges. Deleting edges can create basically new shapes, right? So holding Control, delete it. Can delete vertexes. Cannot delete vertexes that are attached to edges. So boom, boom, vertex. Okay, this vertex will stay though and still be used to model the shape. Okay, so that's a little bit about deleting components. All right, you may find yourself wanting to like duplicate objects inside of Maya rather than you know, making them interesting in some way, and then trying to repeat that action exactly. And so there's a couple ways you can attain that. Okay, so what you can do is you can create an object and you can hit Control D. All right, and notice how the lines look a little differently because it created an object in the same exact place. All right, you can do Control C. Get a little error for this being a student version. Don't worry about it. Continue. Control V, same thing, and it does the same thing. That'll work between scenes. So you could Control C something, open up a new scene, Control V it, and it will pop into place. Whereas the Control D function will not work in that way. Okay. These things also live over here under. Oops, sorry. Under Edit, Duplicate. Okay. So that brings us to our next one called Duplicate Special. So here we are. Let's get rid of these objects. All right. Edit, Duplicate Special. Let's open up the option box for that. All right. Let's leave these things the way they are here. And here we go. We have X, Y, and Z. These are what these fields stand for, even though they're not labeled. The number of copies. That's what I'm interested in right here. So let's do translate on the X 1 unit. And let's make 5 copies. Duplicate Special. Boom. So it moved exactly 1 unit over, which is, this is 1 unit, right? And this is the center. So this is a half of a unit. So it went 1 whole unit over. And if you look at the grid, 1 whole unit to the center. Okay? So if we undo that, undo, there we are. Edit, Duplicate Special, option box, and we do 2 units on the x-axis. See how it's going along the red, the x-axis. We can Duplicate Special, and we get, boom! We get our copies, and they're now moved 2 units on their centers. Okay? So we can do a lot of cool stuff with this Duplicate Special. So not only did we learn how to duplicate objects, but we can also duplicate them in really interesting ways by modifying these fields here. So we can also add a rotation value. Let's also move it up on the y-axis too, and add a rotation on the y of 45 degrees. Duplicate Special. You see, the potential here is pretty enormous, and moving these things manually would take some time. So that's using Duplicate Special with these fields here to do some cool stuff. The number of copies, the X, Y, Z field. So translate is to move on the X, Y, or Z. Rotate is to obviously rotate on the respective axis, X, Y, or Z. So when I'm rotating on the Y-axis, you can imagine the Y-axis is like a rod, and the cube is stuck on that rod, and it can only spin on that rod. Okay, and then the scale, obviously, if I did the same thing here, and changed the scale on everything to 5, you're gonna get some massive cubes. Maybe undo that. So let me do a little bit smaller of cubes for that, huh? Be like 1.2. There we go. Okay, so those increase by 1.2 as they go up as well, which kind of changes their center position, which is interesting. So that's duplicate special, and they control deduplicate. So the last one is going to be called Shift D. So let's delete all these things. This one is duplicate with transform. So if I hit Shift D, move it, and then hit Shift D over and over again, it'll keep the same transform that I gave it. The transform is the way in which it was moved in the in space, or rotated or scaled. So Shift D, up, over, rotate. Now before I do anything else, if I hit Shift D, it's just gonna repeat that action. Okay, that's the Shift D. So this can be really useful when you're creating something like planks of wood or something for like a bench. So Shift D, W, over, right about there. Right? Okay, stairs, something like that. Alright, so instead of using a sphere, a lot of times for modeling, because what a sphere presents is these poles up here, which can be quite a bit of an issue when you're trying to do some modeling, and plus not only the definition of it, even if we lower down the resolution of it, it provides us these weird caps right here, okay? And so what we can do instead is we can take a cube and go to Mesh, Smooth, and it gives us a better version of this sphere to work with, okay? See how all these squares, all these polygon faces are all generally the same size rather than cascading in size when it gets closer to the pole. This is a much better object to work with, so I recommend using Mesh Smooth on a cube in order to get that result that a sphere would get you if it matters in your modeling. Another place that Mesh Smooth is useful is so once you're done with an object and you're ready for a render or ready to send it to a 3D printer or for an animation or to go to a game, you might want to permanently smooth out the features of the object, okay? So when we talked about subdivision preview like this, it just gives you a preview of the object. This object in no other format other than right in this viewport will ever be this smooth. So even if you go to render it, to take an image of it, or to put it in an animation, it's not going to look like that. Okay, so if you want it to permanently look like what it looks like in subdivision preview, let's say you did a little bit of work on this object. Okay, you could, and you even went along beveling it. So it looks great in subdivision preview, right? And you want it to look like that forever. You can use Mesh Smooth to do that. Okay, a little bit weird, different of a result, but it's permanent. Okay, and that's the kind of sacrifice you have to make with actual modeling when the object isn't relying on this subdivision preview within the Maya viewport. Okay, is the Mesh Smooth function. So if you're trying to create a scene or something and you want to always see inside of an object, so maybe you're creating something more elaborate, I'm going to show you how to do that. So if I create this sphere, I make it really big, there's a couple things we can learn about this here. So we can go to surfaces, mesh display, reverse. What this does is it reverses this shape. If I go inside the shape, now the outside of the shape is now shaded as the inside was, and the inside is shaded as the outside was. Okay, and I can do that again. Mesh display reverse. And this is referring to the normals of a shape. Okay, so if we go to the attribute editor, mesh component display, we get all this cool stuff right here. And when we're looking at this display normal, boom, these little green lines pop up, and those are pointing directly out from the face directions. Okay, and those are the normal directions of the face. Okay, and why this is interesting is if I do mesh display reverse, those will now be pointing inwards, okay? And if in the same option over here in the attribute editor, if I do backface culling to full, what it's going to do if it's reversed is it's going to allow me to always see inside of this sphere, which is really cool. This whole sphere is still there, But what this does for me is now I can create a polyplane, hit R, scale it up, really big. Awesome. I can now create like a little environment inside of my world, okay? And what I can do is I can select the sphere, select the plane, select the sphere, select the plane, and open up my channel box, okay? All the way at the bottom, there's these things called layers, okay? Under display. And at the right, there's something called create a new layer and assign selected objects. So what we're going to do is we're going to boom, hit that, double click this, and we can name it. This is creating a layer for these two shapes. We're going to name it environment. Okay, save that. Then we have a couple options here. We can make it visible or invisible. Leave this one alone, and then we could change this till it says R. Now we can't click it anymore. It's on this layer, and if we take it off, we can click it again, but if we hit R, we can't click it. Now this is really useful because now I have a little environment. I can make a little scene in it. I can make a little animation, and I can always see what's going on in there. And when it comes time to export my animation, it's going to look like it happened within this little world. See? All right, that's really useful. So that's a little bit about normals and backface culling and layers. All right, so there's a couple more things we can do with extrude. If I create this cube, select this face here, extrude tool can be used to do what's called offset, okay, and it creates this little mini face along this face with a bunch of four-sided quads, see, a bunch of four-sided shapes. And then I can even re-extrude that, right? Oops. And continue to do the same process with offset and continue to extrude to create interesting shapes, okay, very quickly. Notice how this doesn't require me to create edge loops across the whole shape, because if I wanted to do it another way, insert edge loop, I could. Alright. Just like that. Okay, and it would give me a series of edge loops going across my whole shape that I don't necessarily want to deal with. So, we use the extrude offset to give us that advantage there. Okay, another thing that we can do with the extrude tool is we can add thickness to an object. Okay, so notice how this object, if I scale it up and I hit 4 wireframe, is just one face thick. Okay, and if I deleted a face on top like this, you'd see that it's just a very thin little box. Okay, so if I want to make this a thicker box, rather than selecting every face and trying to extrude it out, which wouldn't work at all. Without a lot of work, which you can do, undo all that. There we go. What you can do is you can select the object, hit extrude, and then use this thickness function right here. Okay, drag on that. Boom! Gives you exactly what you want there. So the extrude can be used to offset a face, or it can be used to give thickness to an object, as well as just its original function, which was to pull out a face. All right. Alright, so not only is the channel box with the layers useful over here, the channel box, when you have an object, you can select an object and add it to a layer by selecting this icon right here. Ignore these right here. Add it to a layer. You can name that layer. You can show or hide that object. Sorry, cancel. You can show or hide that object. You can turn it to a template, a reference, or just leave it blank. Reference cannot be clicked. Template can be used just as a wireframe. Okay, permanent wireframe. Invisibility. There's another way to do this. In Windows Outliner, this is a cool little tool, little window in Maya, and it shows everything in your whole scene. Okay, the outliner shows your 4 cameras that are being used to display the world. It shows your object there, and it has your lights, and it has these shading groups. Okay, those are the shading groups associated with this object right here. So if I create another object, you'll see it pops into the outliner. Okay, now there's a hotkey for showing and hiding objects, and it's going to be Control-H to hide it. Now notice how it goes gray there. Select it in the outliner, Shift-H to show it. Once an object's been hidden with Control-H, it cannot be shown unless you open up the outliner, Window, Outliner, select the grayed object, and hit Shift-H. Okay, so that's a good way to show and hide objects if you have a really complex scene going on. Okay, and if you're wondering where your object went, if you accidentally hit Control H, all you have to do is open up the Windows outliner, find the grayed out object, and hit Shift H again. Alright, so there's a couple hotkeys that you might accidentally hit or be interested in that are just the numbers, like 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we're first going to talk about 1 and 3. Okay, so 1 is what we're going to call just a normal preview. 3 is going to be called a subdivision preview. So when you have an object selected, so you hit Q, you select an object. If you hit 3, it's going to give you what's called a subdivision preview. It's subdividing all of the faces. It's not really being depicted with these edges here, but it's subdividing them and creating like these curves based off of them. Look at 1, 2, 3, 4, and those are settings you can set how it is that it subdivides. But the actual object, if I hit 1, still looks like this. This is just a subdivided preview version of it. It's attempting to smooth the object. It'll become more clear why this is useful as you learn to model. But it's important to know about it right now for many reasons, not only just accidentally hitting it, wondering what's going on. So first and foremost, I'm going to say, do not do any modeling in the subdivision preview mode, okay? You're going to do all your modeling in the number 1 mode, the standard view mode. This is for reasons beyond your understanding probably at the moment, but mostly the fact that the modifications that get made to this object aren't actually that easy to see, okay? See? They don't translate very well when they have such what's called a low resolution, or not very many points or edges actually making up the shape. It's just a very basic shape with 8 points. So we're going to say don't model in subdivision preview, okay? So that's the number 1 and 3. So we're going to go ahead and delete this shape. Now the next one we're going to talk about is number 4. 4 is going to be a wireframe, okay? 4 and 5. So 5 is shaded. 4 is wireframe. This can be very useful if you wanted to go ahead and try to grab a vertex over here, a vertex over here. You can't do that when it's shaded very well. You can try, you can guess, but you can't see it. So learning how to view an object in wireframe is very useful, but it doesn't look very pretty. So 5 shades it, 4 wireframes it. Okay, you can get into a lot of trouble here, but like when you're in the orthographic view over here, you can select both vertexes and you can see what you're doing when you got wireframe. You can see when things are all wonky, just like that. Okay, that's a wireframe and shaded, subdivision, preview, and standard. Okay. Last thing we're going to talk about is something that you might hit, not really matter right now, but 7 is going to enable lights. Okay, 6 is going to enable lights, 7 is going to disable lights. Sorry, 7 disables lights, 6 enables lights. All right, don't worry about lighting right now, but that's what you're going to be seeing on accident. Last one is going to be this guy here, this texture. And if your object has a texture, you can turn that on and off. So those are the only things that I care about right now showing you. Alright, so we talked about the channel box. Now here we are looking at the rest of these. So instead of just going left to right, let's talk about just the ones that affect just the object. So we talked about the channel box, and now here we're going to look at the attribute editor. Okay. And the attribute editor, for the most part, is going to be above your pay grade. It's going to be way too high in difficulty right now to mess with, okay? So when you have an object selected in the attribute editor, it brings up all these components of the object. You have the shape itself. You have this shape node. You have the actual instance of the shape. So this is the input to the function in the shape node. The actual shape itself. And then you have these things called shaders, okay? How is it being shown as far as light? How is light interacting with the shape? All these can be modified right here from the attribute editor, okay, while the object is selected. So the only thing I'm going to tell you to worry about is the material color right here, okay, under the material. You can change its color. Oops. Okay. Transparency of a shape. You have a bunch of stuff to mess with here. This stuff is very high in difficulty. This is much easier to understand right here. And then this stuff right here. So you have the channel box stuff that you can have access to, and you have some translations. So this thing can move. See, just like this. All right. So that's the attribute editor of an object. Alright, so mine is a pretty complex looking software, okay? So the first thing is I want you to get your workspace and your windows looking somewhat like mine. This can change it can look a little different based off of what's called the resolution of your screen. So how big is your actual screen you're looking at? So let's assume your screen is something like mine, okay? Something like the ratio of mine. And we're going to want the workspace set to Maya Classic, okay? These can be turned on and off over here as they are enabled, just like this, see? Okay. We'd like them all off, preferably to start with, so they can all be turned on and off. Okay. Over here, this is just fine. We want this here. We want this set to what's called polygons, okay? Polygon is a type of shape with many sides. And this, we're going to call our menu options set to modeling. So we're going to call this our shelf. Okay, this is going to be called our shelf here. We're going to set shelf to polygons and menu options to modeling. Now notice how these change the way that these menu options work, okay? So it can be quite confusing if you don't have them in the right settings while you're following my tutorials.